Imagine finding out that the feeling of rage actually gives your brain the exact same chemical reward as winning a game. Or like eating a piece of chocolate.
Yeah, the exact same neurochemical rush. It's wild.
It really is.
Okay.
Today, we're looking at why your brain can actually get addicted to being angry and how a tiny almond-shaped cluster of cells inside your head can completely hijack your nervous system in just 80 milliseconds.
Which is incredibly fast.
Right. So if you are someone who rarely loses your cool, or, if you're someone who goes from 0 to 60 the second someone cuts you off in traffic, today's mission is for you. We are looking directly under the hood of your own mind.
Because it's a biological process that is, it's remarkably predictable once you understand it, even though it feels like total chaos when it's happening to you in the moment.
Exactly. And to figure out how this all works, we are pulling from a single, deeply fascinating source for this deep dive. We're looking at excerpts from the book Anger Management Brain Science by Dr. Bill Ray. Okay, let's unpack this. Because the very first thing Dr. Ray establishes, it completely flips the script on how we usually judge ourselves for getting bad.
It really does.
He says anger isn't a moral failing, right? It's not some deep-seated personality flaw. It is, at its core, an evolutionary survival mechanism. It just, happens to misfire constantly in the modern world.
That framing is essential for everything else we're going to talk about today. I mean, you have to remember that our anger circuitry evolved millions of years ago.
Right.
The neurological hardware you're walking around with right now, it was designed to handle saber-toothed tigers, territorial rivals, actual physical threats to your survival.
Not like annoying emails.
Exactly. It was absolutely not designed to handle a passive-aggressive email from a coworker or, sitting in an hour of gridlock. But your brain cannot tell the difference, so it reacts with the exact same neurochemical intensity.
Which is exhausting. So to understand how to actually manage that intensity, we first have to understand the physical structures in the brain that create it. We really need to look at the hardware.
The machinery.
Right. And the star of the show here is the amygdala.
Yes, the amygdala.
Yeah.
It's a small, almond-shaped cluster of neurons, and it's located deep in the temporal lobes of your brain. You can basically think of it as the brain's primary threat detection system.
Okay.
And its defining characteristic is pure speed. When the amygdala perceives a threat, it doesn't take time to analyze it. It initiates a massive physiological alarm in just 80 milliseconds.
80 milliseconds. I really want to pause on that because that is so much faster than conscious thought. I like to think of it like this. If the amygdala is this hypersensitive, blaring smoke detector in your house,
Right.
then the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain right behind your forehead, that's the rational adult who actually has to walk into the kitchen, look around, and check if the house is actually on fire or if it's just burnt toast.
That is a perfect analogy. The prefrontal cortex, it handles your executive function, it does the planning, it weighs consequences, and crucially, it's responsible for inhibiting those impulsive, primitive responses.
Putting on the brakes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there's a third player in this circuit that often gets completely overlooked, and that's the anterior cingulate cortex.
The ACC. Yeah.
The ACC. It acts as the bridge. It's essentially a conflict monitor. So it detects the discrepancy between your emotional impulse, what the amygdala wants to do, and your rational goals. And it literally sends the signal telling the prefrontal cortex to step in and override the amygdala.
Okay, I hear what you're saying about the system, but I have to play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
80 milliseconds is roughly the time it takes a hummingbird to flap its wings 4 times.
It's basically instantaneous.
Right. So if my brain triggers an alarm before I'm even consciously aware that I am mad, telling me to just, pause and use my prefrontal cortex, that feels a bit like telling me to dodge a bullet. I mean, is this actually possible outside of a controlled lab setting?
What's fascinating here is a concept called response flexibility. So yes, the amygdala is incredibly fast, and you cannot stop that initial 80 millisecond alarm. It's going to happen.
Right.
But a healthy, optimal prefrontal cortex has the capacity to create a wedge, like a space between that initial trigger and your actual behavioral reaction.
A split-second delay.
Exactly. When your prefrontal cortex maintains a strong inhibitory connection over the amygdala, you feel the alarm, but you get to choose how to act. You don't just blindly lash out. And strengthening that specific neural pathway is the foundational goal of everything Dr. Ray talks about.
So if my prefrontal cortex knows I shouldn't, yell at my boss, why do I still feel physically hot, shaky, and ready to fight? What is actually happening in my body during that split second that makes it so incredibly hard to hold back?
Well, that brings us to the HPA axis.
The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
Yeah, exactly. This is essentially a chemical relay race inside your body. When your amygdala senses that threat, it immediately signals the hypothalamus. Then the hypothalamus sends a chemical messenger to your pituitary gland.
Which then screams at your adrenal glands, right?
You got it. It screams at the adrenal glands to dump a massive cocktail of cortisol and adrenaline straight into your bloodstream.
And that cascade is what gives you that classic fight or flight feeling. Like your heart rate spikes, your blood pressure goes up. Blood actually moves away from your digestive organs and into your limbs, so your muscles are ready to spring into action.
Right. It is a full-body physiological takeover. But it's not just stress hormones at play here. We also have to look at testosterone. And this requires some real nuance.
Because pop culture usually treats testosterone as just a pure aggression hormone.
Exactly. But Dr. Ray points out that research from Harvard shows testosterone is actually an amplifier. It amplifies whatever behaviors are already dominant for you.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so in a well-regulated person with a strong prefrontal cortex, elevated testosterone might just manifest as confidence, just calm assertiveness. But in an unregulated person, it amplifies reactive anger.
Oh, it's an amplifier, not the root cause. That makes a lot of sense. And then the text gets into serotonin, which I have to say completely changed my perspective on how we eat.
Oh, the diet connection is huge.
Yeah. We usually think of serotonin as the happy chemical, but Dr. Ray notes that low levels of serotonin drastically reduce your frustration tolerance. And since, like 90% of your body's serotonin is manufactured in your gut microbiome, your diet is literally shaping your anger threshold.
It is.
Wait, so by eating a heavily processed diet or letting my blood sugar spike and crash, I'm literally starving the exact neurochemical system that keeps me from snapping at my kids.
You are, sadly. Omega-3 deficiencies, highly processed foods, severe sugar crashes. These create a biological environment where your prefrontal cortex is starved of the energy it needs to apply the brakes, and your amygdala is chemically primed to just overreact.
Wow. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Dr. Ray brings up dopamine.
Yes, the reward chemical.
Right, the chemical that drives our reward and pleasure centers. We touched on this at the very beginning of the deep dive, but we need to dive into it now. When you lose your temper and you snap at someone and force them to back down, your brain actually rewards you with a hit of dopamine?
It does.
That means anger can function just like a behavioral addiction.
Absolutely. And this is a massive blind spot for most people. I mean, think about that feeling when you finally unleash a sarcastic comment you've been holding back for hours.
Oh, yeah.
There's a distinct rush of satisfaction. That is dopamine. Your brain is literally rewarding you for losing your temper because, well, in our evolutionary past, dominating a rival kept you alive.
Wow.
And this dopaminergic reinforcement cycle is exactly why purely intentional anger management, just trying to be a nicer person through willpower alone, almost always fails.
Because you're fighting your own reward system.
Exactly. When an outburst gets you what you want, dopamine paves that neural pathway in concrete.
Yeah.
To truly change, you have to rewire that reward pathway.
Knowing that anger is this deeply ingrained chemical response that our brains actually reward, it really makes you look at our 21st century lifestyle a little differently.
For sure.
Because how does modern life systematically prime us to explode? It feels like our daily routines are practically designed to dismantle our brain's braking system.
Well, the modern world is uniquely hostile to emotional regulation. And the most destructive saboteur, by far, is a lack of sleep.
Sleep deprivation.
Yeah. The text highlights a landmark study by Matthew Walker at UC Berkeley. They took a group of subjects and deprived them of just one single night of sleep.
Just one night.
Just one night. The result was a staggering 60% increase in amygdala reactivity.
A 60% increase in raw emotional volatility from one bad night of sleep. That is terrifying.
Yes, and it gets worse. That sleep deprivation literally severs the functional connectivity between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. You lose the neurological cable that allows you to inhibit your emotions.
Oh, man.
Furthermore, chronic disruption of REM sleep prevents your brain from processing emotional memories. REM sleep is supposed to act like a nocturnal therapy session, right?
Right.
It strips the visceral emotional charge from your memories so you can store them as neutral facts. When you don't get enough REM sleep, you build up this backlog of unprocessed emotional material, making you chronically irritable.
That explains so much about why a bad week of sleep makes everything feel like a full-blown emergency.
Mhm.
And then, we stack chronic modern stress on top of that.
Oh, yeah, the allostatic load.
Right. The source talks about this concept called allostatic load, developed by neuroscientist Bruce McEwen. And I like to think of allostatic load like running your smartphone with like 50 demanding apps open in the background.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. It's the cumulative biological wear and tear of repeated stress. Your battery drains twice as fast just doing basic tasks. And if you are carrying a high allostatic load, that chronic stress literally shrinks the gray matter in your prefrontal cortex and physically enlarges your amygdala.
It structurally changes your brain to become an anger machine.
Which is why the psychological interpretation of events becomes the primary battleground. This brings us to cognitive appraisal theory, developed by Richard Lazarus.
Yes, cognitive appraisal.
The theory states that the objective event, like getting cut off in traffic, does not actually cause the anger. It is your rapid, unconscious interpretation of the event that creates the chemical cascade.
Exactly. Do you appraise the driver as intentionally disrespecting you, or do you assume they might be rushing to a hospital for an emergency?
Right, and I find cognitive reappraisal to be an incredibly liberating concept for you as a listener. Instead of desperately trying to suppress your anger while your blood pressure is already, boiling, you can intercept the process earlier.
Just by changing the story you tell yourself.
Yeah. Just by giving that erratic driver the benefit of the doubt, you decrease the amygdala's activation and engage the prefrontal cortex. You aren't just faking positivity, you are literally changing your brain's chemical reaction to the environment.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, though, we have to acknowledge where those automatic negative appraisals come from in the first place.
Okay, where do they come from?
Our childhood experiences. They wire the amygdala's initial threat library. If you grew up in a home where criticism was harsh or unpredictable or tied to your self-worth, your amygdala becomes exquisitely sensitive to any kind of feedback.
That makes total sense.
So as an adult, when your coworker gives you a mild constructive critique, your brain reacts as if you were back in that childhood environment. Your amygdala is often reacting to a ghost from the past, not the person actually standing in front of you.
Wow, that is a profound realization, the ghost in the room. But let's look at the practical reality here. Reappraisal takes time and practice, right?
It does.
So what happens when you are already triggered? The chemical cascade has started, the cortisol is flowing, the ghost is very much in the room, and you are just vibrating with anger. What are the emergency brakes?
That's when we have to step away from psychology and look at the autonomic nervous system, which has two main branches. The sympathetic branch is your fight-or-flight accelerator.
Okay.
And the parasympathetic branch, which is largely mediated by the vagus nerve, is your rest and digest brake pedal.
And when the accelerator gets pinned to the floor during an argument, we hit a state that relationship researcher John Gottman calls flooding.
Yes, flooding.
Gottman found that when a person's heart rate crosses 100 beats per minute during a conflict, empathy and problem-solving become neurologically impossible.
Completely impossible.
Yeah.
At 100 beats per minute, your prefrontal cortex essentially goes offline.
Mm-hmm.
You are in pure survival mode, and you cannot communicate skillfully when you are flooded.
But the irony of this in normal relationship dynamics is just wild. I mean, usually if you try to walk away from a heated argument, your partner accuses you of stonewalling or avoiding the issue or not caring.
Right.
But Gottman is saying that walking away for a 20 to 30-minute timeout is actually the only neurologically sound way to save their relationship.
It is.
You literally need that physical time for your body to metabolize the adrenaline and for your physiological baseline to return to normal.
Taking a break is not emotional cowardice. It is a biological necessity. And when we're talking about navigating conflict, Dr. Ray emphasizes that active listening and making small repair attempts, like offering a genuine apology for your tone of voice or using a moment of gentle humor, these are not just soft interpersonal skills.
They're neurological tools.
Yes, they are literal neurological tools.
Yeah.
When someone feels truly heard and validated, it activates their parasympathetic nervous system. You are directly de-escalating their amygdala.
That reframes communication entirely. And for individual in-the-moment tools, the text outlines some very specific breathing techniques. Because respiration is the one part of the autonomic nervous system that we can voluntarily control. So it's our direct access point.
Exactly.
There is the physiological sigh, which Andrew Huberman's lab at Stanford researches heavily. It's a double inhale through the nose, followed by a long, complete exhale through the mouth.
That extended exhale is the critical mechanism there. When you breathe out longer than you breathe in, you stimulate the baroreceptors in your arteries.
Baroreceptors?
Yeah, they measure blood pressure and send a signal directly to the vagus nerve telling it to release acetylcholine and physically slow the heart down.
Wow.
The text also mentions military box breathing. You inhale for a count of 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, holds for 4. It forces a rhythm that produces immediate, measurable drops in circulating cortisol.
Okay, so the emergency breaks are crucial. They keep us from saying things we'll regret. But how do we become the architect of a better mind? Like, how do we structurally change the brain over time so we don't need those emergency breaks as often?
Well, Dr. Ray's ultimate point is that we can permanently rewire these pathways using Hebbian learning.
Which is summarized by the phrase, neurons that fire together, wire together.
Yes, this is experience-dependent neuroplasticity. The physical architecture of your brain depends entirely on what you repeatedly do. If you continually indulge impulsive anger, you reinforce that neural pathway, making it faster and more automatic.
But if you practice the opposite,
If you repeatedly practice that extended exhale or cognitive reappraisal, you physically strengthen the inhibitory connection from the prefrontal cortex down to the amygdala.
and there is a clear timeline to this. I mean, you don't meditate for one weekend and walk away with a new brain.
Correct. The research shows that functional changes like more efficient connectivity and lowered baseline cortisol start appearing after 4 to 8 weeks of consistent practice.
Oh,
But structural changes, meaning actual alterations in the physical density and gray matter of the brain, those take 3 to 6 months to fully establish.
and what's incredible is that we can actually measure this now. The text dives into some cutting-edge objective measurement technology. Instead of just guessing how angry someone is, we can look at it.
Yes, the imaging tech is amazing.
There's QEEG, which maps electrical brain waves. It can show excessive high beta waves, which indicates a brain stuck in chronic, anxious hyperarousal. There is FNIRS, which is a portable brain imaging tool that measures blood flow.
Right.
Imagine wearing a lightweight headband that tracks exactly when blood moves away from your prefrontal cortex and rushes to your amygdala during an argument.
And we also have SPECT scans, which measure deep brain blood flow and activity. A SPECT scan can actually identify specific neurological subtypes of anger. Yeah. Is the anger compulsive, driven by an overactive anterior cingulate gyrus where the person gets stuck on a negative thought? Or is it impulsive anger, driven by a sleepy, underactive prefrontal cortex that just can't apply the brakes? This moves anger management from a generic guessing game into precision medicine.
The text also talks a lot about HRV heart rate variability. A healthy, resilient nervous system doesn't have a heart that beats like a rigid metronome. The micro-intervals between beats should naturally vary as you breathe, showing that your vagus nerve is flexibly adapting to your environment.
Exactly.
And there are physical interventions to train this. Dr. Ray discusses EO exercise with oxygen therapy. When you do cardiovascular exercise while breathing pure oxygen, your brain massively increases production of a protein called BDNF.
Which is crucial.
Yeah, think of BDNF as miracle growth for your brain cells. It accelerates your ability to grow new, healthier neural pathways. There is also transcutaneous vagus nerve stimulation, which sounds intensely clinical, but you can trigger it at home just by splashing ice-cold water on your face for 30 to 60 seconds. That activates the mammalian diving reflex.
And we absolutely cannot overlook mindfulness. Sarah Lazar's famous Harvard study used MRI scans to prove that just 8 weeks of daily mindfulness meditation measurably increased the gray matter density of the prefrontal cortex and physically decreased the volume of the amygdala.
So what does this all mean? To me, it means the science is incredibly accessible. You don't necessarily need an expensive SPECT scan or clinical oxygen therapy to start changing your life.
Not at all.
As a listener, you can track your HRV on a basic smartwatch. You can splash cold water on your face when you feel overwhelmed. You can practice box breathing in your car.
Yeah.
You have the tools to begin rewiring your brain structure today.
You can also practice gratitude and mental rehearsal. And I really want to stress this. In a clinical neurobiological context, gratitude is not self-help fluff.
Right.
Functional MRI studies show that practicing gratitude directly increases activity in the medial prefrontal cortex. By mentally rehearsing how you will calmly handle a known trigger, or by actively practicing gratitude, you are shifting your brain's attentional bias away from constant threat detection. You are building and reinforcing those inhibitory circuits before the conflict even happens.
That is a deeply empowering message, and it brings us to the final takeaway for you today. You are not your anger.
No, you're not.
Your brain is a dynamic, changeable structure. By understanding the hardware, managing the chemical cascade, respecting your sleep, and intentionally utilizing neuroplasticity, you can actively build the neural architecture of a calmer you.
Yeah.
You are calling the shots.
This raises an important question, though, a profound philosophical one to leave you with.
Let's hear it.
If science can now objectively map an angry brain using QEEG and SPECT scans, and we can trace that specific reactive brain structure directly back to childhood trauma, chronic stress, or even severe sleep deprivation, how should this change our justice system?
Oh, wow.
Right. If someone commits a crime of passion, and a brain scan shows they literally have a physically shrunken prefrontal cortex and an enlarged hyperactive amygdala, where does neurobiology end and personal moral culpability begin?
That is a heavy, fascinating thought to chew on as you go about your day, especially the next time you're in traffic and someone absolutely loses their mind over a missed turn signal. Remember, their amygdala might just be reacting to a ghost from their past running on 0 REM sleep.
Exactly.
And yours, well, your amygdala still has that 80-millisecond head start. But now your prefrontal cortex is firmly in the driver's seat. Until next time, thanks for taking this deep dive with us.